Hello, welcome everybody. Appreciate everybody joining in and dialing in and taking time out of their evening to hear us talk about the statewide rail plan. I'm going to give a couple minutes for folks to keep joining before we start in earnest. But I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Um, I'm Randy Selleck, Director of Rail Planning and Environmental for DRPT. And I'm leading the state rail plan this time around. Um, I manage the rail planning division at DRPT, and one of the major efforts that we have is this statewide rail plan. And so this meeting is really going to serve hopefully as an introduction to those of you that aren't familiar, and also help to educate those of you that already do know something about the rail plan as well. I'm going to go ahead and introduce some of the members of our team here. I'll hand it first to Karen Harrington.
Hey, good evening. Karen Harrington. I'm with HDR. I am the project manager for the consultant team, HDR, that is helping support DRPT with preparing this 2026 plan.
Thanks, Karen. And then Ian, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ian Baxter. I work here at the Institute for Engagement and Negotiation at UVA's Welling Cooper Center for Public Service. IEN is facilitating the public outreach and stakeholder engagement on behalf of DRPT and HDR as a part of the rail plan update. So we're really excited to have this meeting and hopefully get some good questions and show you what we've been working on. So appreciate everyone's time attending.
Thanks, Ian. Taylor, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Taylor Holden, Rail Planning and Data Manager here at DRPT, helping with all things rail planning throughout the state.
Great. Thank you. Um, we will have some introductory words from our director, Maria Zimmerman, when she joins. She's a little bit late. And so in the interim, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to Ian and let him kind of step you through how things will work during the meeting this evening.
Sure. Thank you, Randy. So I just wanted to quickly go over some of the functionality of our Zoom webinar here. I know probably most folks on the call have been in a Zoom meeting, but because there's so many folks, which is exciting, we have a Zoom webinar, so we're not dealing with people accidentally unmuting. But what that doesn't mean is it doesn't mean that we're not going to have any interaction during this call. So there are two ways I think we're going to ask you to participate this evening. So we're first going to go over sort of the statewide rail plan, like Randy mentioned, as well as the survey results. Some of you probably engaged with the public survey. We're going to talk about what we found out. We'll then be using the Zoom chat button to ask you questions. So that's probably something you're pretty familiar with. We'll put a question in the chat and then feel free to respond through that. We'll also be answering some questions, or folks from DRPT will be answering some questions at the end of the meeting. That one, if you want to use the Q&A button, that allows you to submit a question either anonymously or with your whatever participant name you've used this evening. And that will be the way we kind of manage the Q&A at the end of the meeting. So chat for the questions that we're going to be asking you, and then the Q&A for the questions at the end. So to kind of test that, we have a few icebreaker questions that I would love folks to use the chat and try and guess the correct answer for. So we have two questions. The first one is, what percent of growth in ridership did Virginia state-supported passenger rail services experience between 2022 and 2025? So you want to put your answer or your guess in the chat, and we can see if anyone gets close. Oh, the chat is disabled. Okay, give me 1 sec.
That's why we have these to, get
Yeah,
all the
right.
issues out.
Settings. Okay, well, I guess you're gonna have to use the Q&A. I'm gonna try and fix that while Randy's talking. But does anyone have any guesses? I see some guesses in the question and answer, so I'll give it a few more minutes. But I will fix the chat. Thank you for letting me know, everyone.
Yeah, apologize for that.
Okay. So the answer is 47%. So I think actually that's higher than anyone put in the chat, which is that's exciting, right? That it's more than what folks think. All right, our next question is how many truck trips were diverted by use of rail from DRPT supported projects between 2022 and 2025? All right, I'm seeing some millions, some hundred thousands. I see give it a few more seconds. I appreciate everyone participating. All right, well, the answer is 50 million. So very high. I think the highest I saw was about 3 million. Oh, 5 million. Okay. So very exciting progress being made over the last few years in Virginia. And so that is our icebreaker question that was intended to test the functionality of this that I will now amend. But I'm going to kick it back over to Randy to kind of talk about what our agenda is this evening and then walk you through some of the statewide rail plan overview.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ian, and good job on those questions. So we're going to walk through the statewide rail plan overview. I'm just giving you a kind of a 30,000 foot view of what the state rail plan is and what the rail plan is about. And we'll move on from that to kind of looking at our last rail plan, the 2022 rail plan update. We'll then look at the 2026 plan coming up as that we are currently updating and walk through our results from our initial public and stakeholder surveys that we had in May. And then we'll go to next steps and we'll have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. Next slide, Ian. The Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, we are really, we're a transit and a rail agency. A lot of DOTs, all of the modes are sort of contained under the one state DOT organization. But in Virginia, we have VDOT, Virginia Department of Transportation, and then we have the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation handling that transportation and, I'm sorry, that transit and rail mode. We help to connect. We see one of our big roles is connecting people in the Commonwealth, individuals, organizations, et cetera, coming together to improve transit and rail. We really look at kind of, we take a multimodal approach of looking at the road network and try to increase the rail network and transit network usage in the state. And we help to work with our different public transportation organizations and passenger rail operators to facilitate and to help fund and move transportation forward for rail and transit and ensure that people in the Commonwealth have options to travel, and not just vehicular modes of transportation. Next slide, please. Some benefits of rail. Really, I mean, rail is a very economical way to move freight and passengers, especially on the freight side. Passenger rail really helps to get a lot of truck traffic off of the road. Trucks have a outsized impact on the road maintenance bills, and so moving freight to rail really helps that situation. Passenger rail, it's a much more efficient way to move people as opposed to automobiles, and a much safer by far than traveling by automobile. And of course, there's environmental benefits. It takes a lot less fuel, both passenger and freight sides, to move people and freight around by train rather than single occupancy vehicles and trucks. And again, much safer mode of travel compared to single occupancy vehicles, and also congestion. And those of you who live in the Northern Virginia area, those of you who travel on I-81, Hampton Roads, you can attest to the fact that there's a lot of road congestion, and this is just a transit, both transit and rail provide a welcome alternative to either moving freight or people by single occupancy vehicles or trucks. Next slide, please. This is a map of Virginia's rail network. We have two major Class 1 railroads in Virginia, CSX and Norfolk Southern. CSX in that map is in red, Norfolk Southern is in blue, and then we have 9 additional short line railroads that operate, that have operations in different parts of the state throughout the Commonwealth. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, Ian. The intercity passenger rail network, we have VRE, we have Amtrak as passenger rail operators. VRE kind of spans that it's really a commuter rail operator. We also have the Virginia Breeze bus service that moves across the state. We have numerous routes. We also have a new Virginia Breeze route that's an east to west route that's not currently shown on this map. So one of the things that we'll be doing, we'll be updating this map to reflect that new service. Next slide, please. Now we're getting into some sort of detailed information about the statewide rail plan. The Federal Railroad Administration doesn't currently require a statewide rail plan update. We're doing it on a 4-year cycle. In the past, it's typically been tied to funding opportunities. So certain funding opportunities at the federal level will require inclusion in a statewide rail plan. We maintain that 4-year cycle because we want to be ready for, and if federal legislation changes, which we have a reauthorization coming up later this year, potentially. So we want to be able to have it ready. It is another checkbox on an application for federal funding. So it does give you that opportunity. And then also we just see a value at the state level of having a regularly updated rail plan. And so we maintain it also for that reason. But regardless, the rail plan will be approved by our own CTB, and then it will go to the Federal Railroad Administration for their adoption. Next slide, please. The Virginia Statewide Rail Plan, it provides a path forward for us. It charts that sort of just near-term and farther out-term goals and objectives and things that we are trying to achieve with rail in the state. It does align with VTRAN's goals and objectives. So VTRAN's is the state's multimodal long-range plan. And so the rail plan fits in underneath the framework of those VTRAN's goals and objectives. We also work closely with our partner agency, the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, VPRA. They're really on the implementation side. DRPT is involved in more of the planning, and in passenger rail, the long-range planning, and more of the freight side of things. And then once a project will get through NEPA, environmental clearance, and preliminary engineering, we would then hand it off to VPRA for the implementation phase. The plan includes a 6-year and a 20-year horizon. So the 6-year horizon near term is based on the 6-year improvement program that the state has. And that's projects that have money programmed on them to move forward. And then the 20-year horizon is really looking further out to those projects that some of them we just have a general idea of what they'll be, a very high level cost estimate maybe, not as much information. So those are kind of our two pieces of the plan as far as looking at the projects that the plan includes. Obviously, lots of data is collected for the plan, which allows us to look from plan to plan at the progression of things and do some trend analysis which is really, beneficial to see, are we really moving the needle on some of these things, some of these efforts in the state? And then again, it provides an avenue for federal funding, provides the ability for us to apply to those federal programs for money. Next slide, please. The FRA has a fairly prescriptive outline for the plan. We then do things in addition to that outline. We look at things like the role of rail and statewide transportation, an existing inventory of what we have in the state as far as passenger and freight infrastructure, trends and forecasts, stakeholder input, rail services needs and opportunities are all things that are examined in the plan. And then we have a detailed program of investments for both passenger and freight rail. And those two items are their own sections in the plan. And then we have a state rail service and investment program, which really is more based on the service side of things. And finally, the plan summarizes the coordination and review that was done with the public during the plan process. Next slide, please. Looking back at our 2022 plan, the plan was one of the first in the country to be done on the ArcGIS story map format. So this is an online format and has the advantage of allowing for things to be, you can do interactive maps, you can do interactive graphs and charts, and it's just a little bit more visually appealing. And so we went with that format for the last plan. We're going to continue with this next plan in that same format. And that last plan also, there were some sea changes going on in Virginia. There were the creation of VPRA was relatively recent. Transforming Rail in Virginia, which was the deal with CSX to purchase right of way and track throughout the state, was underway. And then IIJA, which is the federal funding bill, had just been come into being, and so that's something that we will look at what's changed since that since that last plan with those things and how those things have evolved in with rail funding. I'm going to go ahead and jump here, and I see that Maria Zimmerman's joined, our director, and I'll let her jump on, introduce herself, and then she wanted to just say a few words to everybody. So go ahead, Maria.
Thank you, Randy. Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for making time out of your schedules to join us here for this conversation tonight. I also just want to thank our team here at DRPT who leads our rail efforts. They are a small but mighty crew, and I'm excited that you'll get to meet and hear from some of them tonight. As you heard, we are very excited to be doing this update, and it really reflects, as the name suggests, it is our state plan. And so getting input from people across the state, the many different stakeholders, from those who are operating service, as well as those who rely on passenger and freight service, and those who have aspirations, maybe have never ridden the train but would like to, or as well as those who might be frequent train riders. So just again, really wanted to thank everyone for being here. Your input is invaluable, both in discussions like this, but in other ways that we've been collecting input through surveys, through focus groups, and more to come on all of this. So thanks, Randy. I'll pass it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Maria. Appreciate that. Next slide, Ian. And here I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Ian, and he's going to walk through the engagement schedule and then continue with talking about the survey results. Yep, take it away, Ian.
Yeah, well, thank you, Randy. And after some tech support that I was doing while Randy was presenting, I have good news and bad news. The bad news is it looks like the chat, I can't undisable it during the meeting, but the good news is that the question and answer functionality should be just fine for what we're asking folks to do. So I do appreciate everyone's patience. Zoom always throws a wrench into things. And I just want to remind folks to continue. I see some folks have submitted some questions. So feel free to keep doing that, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. But Yeah, like Randy mentioned, I guess I can give a little bit of background about IEN. We are one of the units at the Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service here at the University of Virginia. Our focus is on collaborative engagement processes. So we've worked with plenty of state agencies across our history, and now are really excited to be working with DRPT on both the public engagement and the stakeholder engagement component of the statewide rail plan. I'll talk a little bit about how those differ in a moment. So the statewide rail plan engagement schedule, we began in February and we're going to end in December with the sort of final draft of the plan. But we've sort of divided this process into three phases. One is interviews and survey. The second, work groups and public meetings, which is what we're in right now. And then the last one is plan review and refinement. And so what we scoped is basically kicking off this process with a series of 12 stakeholder interviews from folks in freight rail, passenger rail, NPOs, local governments, rail advocacy organizations, to really establish sort of a broad baseline of where we are statewide as far as passenger and freight rail. Sort of picking up where the last plan update ended and kind of grounding our work in our engagement work. And then our work kind of, there's sort of a fork where we end up working directly with these stakeholder groups from some of those same interest groups and industry groups that I described. We had a survey that went directly to them. And then obviously we had a public survey that I'm going to talk about the results of in a moment, which I thought was really interesting. And I think you will too. Now what we are doing is conducting a series of stakeholder working groups over the summer, basically. So we're basically having a series of one a month. We have 4 stakeholder groups that we've established in coordination with HDR and DRPT. And then we're having this public meeting where we'll be talking, sort of kicking it off with this overview of the statewide rail plan, talking about what we found, and then beginning to really solicit more feedback and questions from you all that we can bring into a second public meeting, which I'll talk about in a moment, which is currently scheduled for July, which is next month because we are in June now. After all of our meetings are concluded this summer, we'll be conducting another stakeholders and public survey that will be building on some of the themes and areas of interest that we hear about tonight and from the survey in our second public meeting. We will then go to the Commonwealth Transportation Board to talk about sort of the draft plan, where it is, solicit their feedback. And then finally, we'll have one last stakeholder meeting with all of our groups together, and then one last virtual public meeting to review the draft plan and solicit any sort of feedback on what it looks like. You'll have the actual text and copy available to review, and then it will be sent back to the Commonwealth Transportation Board for approval of the final plan. So that is our engagement schedule. So hopefully there's a good amount of touch points that you can get involved with over the course of the year, and we're really excited to hear from you. And just briefly, this meeting, it's building on the previous engagement that we've done both with members of the public. I know that people have been emailing and asking questions prior to this meeting, emailing comments that will be directed to the plan team, but also through the public survey. And really what we hope to gain from this through public engagement, rather than it being sort of a cursory process, is key insight into preferences and high-level priorities from those folks that are, like Maria kind of alluded to, interested in riding the train, frequent users of the train, have a business that relies on freight rail, et cetera, et cetera. So getting all of those touch points and trying to consolidate into this guiding document is really the goal of the stakeholder engagement and public engagement process. And it wouldn't be, the plan would look really different without this. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about the public engagement and survey results that we had. Like the timeline kind of alluded to, this was conducted over the course of about a month, I think between March and April. And it was actually created by one of our partner units here at the Weldon Cooper Center, the Center for Survey Research. So they were working with us on this project. They helped analyze this data, worked with DRPT to create the Qualtrics platform that you all used to answer the questions, and then also create some of the great graphs that I will show you in a moment to kind of help visualize the data. But the survey, we received just a tick north of 2,700 responses from over 400 unique zip codes. We've created a map here of where sort of the most responses were concentrated. And it looks like, over half of the responses that were received were from folks, these are by VDOT districts, I should say. Northern Virginia, Richmond, and Hampton Roads were over half of the responses that we've gotten, with basically the remaining VDOT districts making up the rest of the responses. And so I think that's important to kind of keep in mind, and why we're continuing to do outreach is that, this is a first touch point. We can see where we're getting data from. How are we making sure to continue to get data from all areas of the state? These are some very, very, very high level sort of general results of the survey that we'd worked to kind of refine and basically begin our discussion this evening. And so of those surveyed, those 2,700, mostly Virginians, I think there was about 1% of folks that were not from the Commonwealth. There's a strong preference for expanding rail access, with the vast majority of respondents supporting service to more destinations, which should come as no surprise considering like we talked about earlier, the increase of rail usage, even the last few years in Virginia. Most respondents favor expanding travel within Virginia and to Washington, D.C., rather than focusing on out-of-state connections, which was an interesting insight that I'll talk a little bit more about. Nearly 60% of those surveyed supported a balanced approach that includes both new routes and enhanced service on existing corridors. So one of the questions asked, would you want new routes, enhanced service on existing routes, or both? And the majority of folks said both. And then overall input reflects a strong demand for increased connectivity, accessibility, and system growth. So people who took the survey are really interested in rail continuing to grow in Virginia, continuing to be more frequent, to have a larger geographic footprint. And so I think that's a good place to kind of start as we get into some of the more specific questions. Like I mentioned, all of these are out of around 2,700s. Not everyone answered every question, but everyone pretty much did. You'll see that in this question, would you like to see the Virginia rail system increase or decrease the number of stops? The vast majority indicated we want more stops, with a few folks maybe maintaining the current service destinations and travel times, if maybe they're thinking about it as a trade-off. But it seemed like most folks, by far most folks who took the survey, wanted there to be more stops. This was the question that we thought was kind of interesting, that, about 1,000 more people indicated that they wanted to expand travel within Virginia and DC if they had to choose between that and expanding travel to places outside of the state in the District of Columbia. You had some folks saying they weren't sure, didn't necessarily have a preference. But it was interesting that, of this question, were you to pick one or the other, it seemed like folks that are within Virginia responding are really interested in being able to access more places in the Commonwealth via train, which I think is probably, related to some of the work that's being done through the Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative, and generally people being more familiar with increasing their sort of desire to use passenger rail within the state. So we thought that was an interesting insight, that more folks said that they were actually looking for more destinations within Virginia rather than, and DC, I should say, than outside of it. And here's the question where, should Virginia invest more to establish new service to new destinations or more service on existing routes? And most people said both. In fact, it was, about 1,000 more people said both than one option or another, which I think it reflects, again, what we saw or what we were seeing across the survey results. The next area of the survey, so I should kind of zoom out again, maybe, in that, the survey really looked at, we're interested in what people's preferences are, as far as sort of general passenger rail, opinions about general passenger rail in Virginia, about where it should go, how frequent it should be. Now we asked folks to consider specific strategies that have to do with different issue categories that are going to be components of the plan. Within the public survey, we asked folks about freight rail, passenger rail, and then stations, rail station and access. So we asked respondents to consider all of these options and pick their top two. There was also a free response section where folks could suggest a strategy that was not listed. But I'll kind of just go through these because the charts are a little busy because there are so many options, but I think it's important to kind of understand what everyone was looking at and how they ended up responding. When thinking about freight rail, which of these strategies do you consider the most important for the 2026 statewide rail plan? Increasing funding for development of rail-served economic development sites, increasing funding to grant programs to assist railroads and rail shippers with rail capital expenses and/or shipper incentive programs, prioritize improving safety at railroad/highway grade crossings and reducing blocked crossings, maintain and expand Commonwealth ownership and control of freight rail corridors for freight service preservation, prioritize shifting truck freight traffic to rail to lessen highway maintenance impacts, and then establish Commonwealth policies on rail corridor abandonment for transportation and recreation purposes. So you'll see that spans a lot of different categories, right? From economic development to outdoor recreation to safety. And so we thought it was important to kind of have folks really prioritize through their choice what they would sort of, you can sort of see what folks' main priority is through what they've chosen. For passenger rail, it's a lot of the same questions that we'd already asked, but again, we're kind of restricting folks' ability to only choose two: increasing rail service and reliability, serving new travel markets with stations on new passenger rail corridors, establishing new stations and stopping patterns and frequencies on existing passenger corridors, providing rail trip times that are competitive with car trip times, expanding all-day and/or peak period commuter services. So really thinking about some of those other questions, the questions that we'd asked earlier about frequency, about sort of geographic footprint, but then also introducing some of these questions about, if a train trip takes the same amount of time as a car trip, that's a different sort of wrinkle on what folks would want on a passenger rail. And then obviously expansion of service wasn't something that we touched on in those previous questions, but is certainly a key component of passenger rail policy. And finally, we asked folks about stations, so the actual places where you catch the train in Virginia, and sort of you'll see that these questions kind of span, kind of like the freight rail question did, a few different policy areas. The first is to provide dedicated transit connections at stations to local activity centers, providing complementary intercity bus route connections to the rail network. So really thinking about leveraging rail stations into multimodal opportunities for folks to continue their journey or go home. Encourage private real estate development around stations, otherwise known as transit-oriented development, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concept, to both improve station vitality and or move existing stations to better locations in the region, improve parking and highway access to stations, and expand sidewalk, multi-use path, and bike infrastructure to connect stations to local activity centers. So you'll see that there are different questions asking about multimodal transportation infrastructure, right? One is about transit connections, one is about highway connections, one is about sidewalk, multi-use paths, bike infrastructure. So you'll see that these questions kind of touch on different areas involved in sort of accessing the station. So as far as the strategy results for the freight rail, it looked like, and it probably doesn't come as a surprise considering most folks who took this survey, I would imagine, are not involved in freight rail or aren't operating freight rail, but probably engage with it as someone that sort of seeing it happen and are interested in what it can do as someone who maybe commutes in Virginia or otherwise uses, highways and trains. Prioritize shifting truck freight traffic to rail to lessen highway maintenance impacts was the top choice. And I should say that these graphs all incorporate the top two choices, so they're kind of weighted as such. You see that folks were also really interested in prioritizing safety, so thinking about highway and grade crossings, which I'll talk about in a moment. We also asked that in the survey, but then also increasing funding for rail-served economic development sites. So I think folks sort of zooming out from this are really interested in how can we, work to make sure that perhaps less cars are on the highway due to increased freight rail usage. How are we prioritizing safety at crossings that involve freight rail trains, and then potentially thinking about increasing funding to those economic development sites, across the state to potentially support freight rail. Again, very similar to what we had heard in our opening questions, sort of focused on passenger rail, is that we saw that folks were really interested in increasing rail service and reliability. And I think that that's a theme that we've heard across our engagement thus far, even with especially actually with some of the stakeholder groups. Similar to, and interestingly enough, kind of thinking about providing rail trip times competitive with car trip times, how is taking the train actually provide a competitive advantage, in addition to some of the benefits that Randy had kind of described as far as keeping cars off the road or, environmental benefits. But, as someone who needs to get somewhere on time, can I take a train in the same amount of time it would take a car? And then finally expanding into new markets. So, I think this tension between increasing rail service and reliability, going to new markets, and also making sure that it all runs in a way that still serves folks, I think is really what we're hearing as far as interest in passenger rail in Virginia. And finally, we had sort of the top three choices from the survey results around existing stations. Folks were really interested in providing dedicated trains and connections at existing rail stations. They're also very interested in providing other multimodal infrastructure like sidewalk, multi-use paths, and bike infrastructure. And then they were also interested in maybe, having private real estate development around stations, this transit-oriented development. Maybe it would appeal to some folks that took the survey to live near a train station. And if there was, new development that was happening near them, that would be an amenity that they would consider and would kind of potentially affect where they would want to live. So finally, we kind of zooming out to these kind of, in summary, I should say, the strategies around passenger rail really focus on improving reliability, increasing frequency, expanding service, and making travel times competitive with driving. Freight rail was emphasizing shifting truck traffic to rail, improving safety at crossings, and supporting rail-served economic development. Strong interest in all types of multimodal connection, transit-oriented development, and improved pedestrian and bike access. And then actually, I'll talk about it in a moment, but some of the usage patterns we thought that were kind of interesting. Most respondents travel by rail occasionally rather than frequently, indicating significant opportunity for continued growth on passenger rail. So this, I kind of alluded to it just then. We kind of asked some other not quite demographic questions, but sort of questions around how much the respondents use rail within Virginia. So this is within the state of Virginia, how often do you use rail? And the majority of respondents actually said, not monthly, but I travel by train maybe a few times a year. And then 746 respondents said, I don't typically travel by train within Virginia, which I actually think kind of speaks to what one of the comments that Maria had made, where there are a lot more folks sort of recognizing that that rail might be a way in which they would like to travel moving forward. And so there's obviously a lot of resources around sort of helping folks understand what's available. And obviously there's a real appetite for continued growth. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting, or I guess my team thought that was kind of an interesting takeaway, where you had the majority of respondents on this question say it's actually a few times a year, or I actually haven't traveled, or I don't typically travel by train. And that could be because there isn't a station serving them. That could be because the time that the train comes doesn't work for their schedule. So there's a variety of different reasons. We thought that was kind of interesting. Within Virginia, we asked around, has your travel been for personal or work reasons? And the majority of respondents indicated that it's been mostly personal travel, all personal travel, and then some indicating that it's been even balance of personal and work travel. But we're seeing really that most people are taking trains within Virginia for personal reasons, for leisure reasons, with some folks using them for either mostly work travel or all work travel. And I think that depends obviously where you live in the state. If there's commuter rail that serves your area, or if you live somewhere where there's only sort of longer range passenger rail. We asked the same series of questions around how often you travel by train to locations outside of Virginia. And again, we saw the same thing, where folks that do take the train from Virginia to outside of the state take it a few times a year, or they haven't done it yet. And so I think a lot of the same conclusions apply, where maybe folks are waiting for a route that's quicker to where they're going. Maybe it's too expensive. There's a variety of different reasons why that might be the case. And very similarly to within Virginia, we're seeing that most folks are taking the train outside of the state for personal reasons, or the majority are riding it for personal reasons. And then we just combine the travel frequency, the travel frequency that to show you that combined with these responses, we're seeing that it's mostly occasionally, or actually folks aren't traveling on the train as often, though we are seeing the once a month or more often. When you combine them, it actually comes in second place. So it's kind of interesting. I just sort of talked about that. So yeah, most respondents travel only occasionally. 26% travel at least once a month or more, and 22% do not typically travel by train at all. So again, sort of reinforcing that there's a lot of room, continued room for growth in passenger rail within the state and outside the state. Kind of wrapping up, we talked a little bit about crossing grades and safety associated with freight rail. And so one of the questions that was on the survey, if you took it, was, are there any specific railroad crossings in your community that need safety improvements, closure, or different design, such as a bridge or underpass? And so we had 362 distinct responses that included the locality wherein the crossing is, the location of it, and sort of the street, or describing where it is, and then asking folks to actually write a narrative of some of the associated challenges. So like, what about this crossing is unsafe, is safe? And here is actually a sort of a heat map of where we heard. So each of these dots are one of the crossings that we heard about. And so you'll see there's a good cluster in both Richmond and the Hampton Roads area, but you see them across the state. And what DRPT is able to now have is sort of being able to coordinate and think about some of these grade crossings, and having that list, I think, is really useful for them. So we appreciate people, responding and looking at the data. There was some pretty detailed information about, accidents or reasons why it can be unsafe. And so I think that information is really valuable, especially considering folks who are really interested in safety as it pertains to freight rail. That is sort of our overview of the survey. And again, I'm going to ask folks, I see a lot of folks have put questions in the chat, which is really useful. What I'm going to ask is a few different follow-up questions around the survey data. And I would love for you all to use the Q&A function to answer some of these questions, to kind of gauge some of your reactions around, the data that was presented. And then I will kick it back over to my colleagues at DRPT. So the first question is, what was the most surprising result of the public survey? So I'll give folks a moment to type in the chat, type in the Q&A, what they felt the most surprising area of the public survey was. So it looks like folks are basically, a lot of people are saying they're really, they're surprised at how few people that took the survey ride the train, or the number of folks that indicated they don't ride the train. Also, people were surprised that people were mostly using it for personal travel as opposed to work travel. Great. People are saying low number of respondents. That's certainly, again, continuing to get, better data is a key component of the statewide rail plan. So that's certainly something that we want to continue to improve on. Right. What was the most interesting result of the public survey? Seeing great room for growth. That's definitely something that we noticed as well. Opportunity and demand, and desire to continue to see passenger rail increase in Virginia. People are interested in that. People were identifying transit-oriented development as something that they were interested in. Let's see. these are some great responses. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to read all of them, but these are really insightful. I appreciate it. Bike ped connections to stations, the high number of unique responses about rail crossing and safety and concerns, desire for faster, more reliable service. Yeah, it sounds like, we were able to draw some conclusions. And I do see some folks who had questions about the methodology. And what we'll do, we have a whole report that will describe the way the survey was conducted and have all of this data available. So if that will be up pretty soon. So appreciate the interest. All right. And are there other takeaways from the public survey you'd like to highlight? So good and bad, we're interested in hearing, your responses to this data and what you think it means. Seeing someone succinctly, people want more trains. People want trains that are faster and more reliable. People are noticing that, there's perhaps if there are more trains, more stops, it could slow it relative to car times. So that's certainly a trade-off that we'll have to be aware of. Few responses from Southside Virginia, which is an underserved rail part of the state, certainly thinking about how to increase, the possibility for folks across the state to use the train. We want to ride, but there aren't that many trains to ride. Great. Our next question, I just have two more questions, and I know that some of you have already answered this question through some of your other questions that we are collecting, and if we don't get to tonight, then we're certainly collecting them and we'll have moving forward. But are there any additional data points that you'd like to include in the 2026 Virginia Statewide Rail Plan? So this might go back to some of what Randy was talking about as far as what the plan covers, and if there's anything that you all are really interested in learning about and potentially being included in the plan. Data points about how, let's see, how rail usage in Virginia directly affects other states, certainly. Building and improving rail maintenance facilities and other associated infrastructure. Yeah, what do people consider competitive in terms of time and cost? That's an interesting question, and certainly having to think about those benchmarks before you can make a claim to either. Rail trails, certainly. People appreciate the breeze, but it has limited capacity. Thinking about suggesting different studies for specific new rail routes. Great. This is some really great feedback. Really appreciate it. Someone mentioned looking to different regional long-range plans to talk about how they've incorporated commuter rail and other multimodal infrastructure, and thinking about extrapolating that to the state level. Electrification of trains, high-speed rail. So, well, thanks. All of this is being captured, and all of it is really great feedback, and that's why we had this meeting. And finally, the last question, and I know that some of you, again, I apologize for the kind of, the Q&A makes it a little clunky, but we had mentioned earlier that we were going to be conducting another survey following both of the public meetings this summer. So are there any questions you feel are important to ask in a follow-up survey that would be going out to the general public? And I know that some of you have already mentioned some that will definitely be recording, but just wanted to make sure we asked that question. Oh. Specific questions on new rail routes. How much interest is there bringing bikes on board more easily and cheaply? Excuse me. Thinking about people's car use versus train use. What connections are currently missing in the statewide passenger rail networks? What would get you to ride the train? That's a great question. So just very quick sort of sketch of what I feel like I'm seeing is that thinking about for those folks that don't use the train or maybe like I think people are identifying that a lot of folks in this survey don't ride the train regularly, and they're interested in why that is. And I think that's an interesting set of questions. All right. Well, thank you all for participating so well. This really some awesome questions and awesome insight, and we're really excited to get this feedback from you all. I'm going to kick it back over to Randy. We are going to start answering or posing some of the questions that we heard this evening to DRPT to see if they see what some of the answers are. I don't know, Randy, do you have any insights or any response to what we've been hearing?
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, no, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of start at the top of the list. We probably won't be able to answer all these questions, but we can certainly answer some of them. And then also, when we've flipped to our last slide, actually, let me go ahead and let me talk about this, what's on the screen here about what's next first, and then we'll get to the Q&A, and we can go to that last slide. And there's an email address there that you'll be able to, if we weren't able to answer a question, or if you have other questions, that you can always submit via that email, and we can answer those for you. So going forward, this meeting is going to complement the next round of surveys and public meetings. And so now we're going to take this information back, look at some of these rail strategies that we had identified, and see how sort of these comments and these thoughts and questions dovetail with those strategies, and develop them further as we go towards that second set of meetings. The second virtual public meeting will be later this summer. So you'll have an opportunity to look at those proposed recommendations and comment on those as well. And then the public stakeholder and survey meeting number 2 will incorporate and build on that feedback, and then the March surveys as well. So we'll just kind of continue to build. And also, as we get closer to having a completed plan, there'll be more to react to, obviously. And then so the submission of the final plan to FRA will probably be closer to early 2027. We're targeting putting the plan in front of the CTV for their adoption in late 2026 December meeting, hopefully. So yeah, it'll probably be early 27 before it gets to FRA. But yes, now if we can go ahead and flip to that next slide, Ian. And so the email there, the DRPT PR@drpt.virginia.gov is the address that, if you send a question in, if we don't get to your question, feel free to send it, and we can go ahead and get a response to you. But starting at the top of the list, good question about Christiansburg. The question is there a more precise date for the opening of the Christiansburg station than 2027, which is the only answer I've been able to find. As far as I know, working with VPRA, that 2027 is the target date. They don't have anything really more specific than that, unfortunately, at this time. As they move through the process, I'm sure that will change, and we'll get a little bit more of a date certain. But that's currently what we do know. And I'm gonna skip. There's some comments interspersed in here, and I'll address the questions. And thank you for the comments. Why is there a reason why there aren't 2 buses per day on the new Tidewater route? And they're talking about the Virginia Current that just started recently. Yeah, I'm not really on the transit side of the shop, but my understanding is that they started the service, and if the service is successful, there's the opportunity that potentially that service will increase in the future. And so that's my educated guess, is that they needed to get the service going. You've got the buses, starting at either end of the route in the morning and then going across and arriving in the afternoon. And if that service is successful, I'm guessing there's a chance that will, that can be increased at some point. And also I'll mention the Current is also providing us great information on ridership for, looking at a east-west rail corridor at some point. So it's benefiting us in that way too. Does VTrans have public meetings, and who's the contact person? VTrans does have public meetings when they are in the process of doing their plan update. It's not on the same cycle as the state rail plan. I wish I could tell you off the top of my head what that cycle is, but it's not. It is a 4-year cycle. So once that kind of time comes around, there'll be lots of social media blasting about how you can get involved in VTrans, but it definitely does have public meetings. It has a public process. So you can look out for that. If you go to the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment, go to their website, OIP. They should have information on their website about VTrans, about how it updates, and I'm sure they also have contact information on there. You certainly can ask, and they would be able to tell you more about that update cycle. Good point about the slides. Some of the slide fonts may be a little bit small. We certainly will take that into consideration and change that on the next presentation. So thanks for that input. Have either Tennessee or North Carolina shown interest in supporting expansion of passenger rail beyond Christiansburg to Bristol and to points in either Tennessee or North Carolina? Certainly we work with North Carolina regularly. They on the eastern seaboard route and what's called the S line, that both Virginia and North Carolina are working on, a new rail line. It was abandoned right away that we bought from CSX. It will, a one-day sea service. It's actually now going towards the preliminary engineering phase. We're working with North Carolina regularly on that. There's also their Corridor ID project, which is Charlotte to DC. We're working with them on that. So absolutely engaging with North Carolina on, more rail. Tennessee, maybe not quite as much. I know that they have some of their own efforts happening. The intent is certainly with our DC to Bristol corridor that we would eventually extend that corridor beyond Bristol and into Tennessee. But those are kind of, those conversations are still, I think, in an early stage. First, we need to get to Bristol, and then we can go beyond that. But absolutely, we're coordinating and working with other states around us to try to help move things forward with passenger rail. What are the main blockers to dramatically expanding passenger rail service in Virginia? What does DRPT need to plan and build new multiple VRE and Amtrak routes? I guess the biggest obstacles, one of them is funding. Rail infrastructure is very expensive. Highways are built to last 20, 30 years. Rail infrastructure is built to last 50, 60, 70 years. Everything is more expensive. And so it is difficult, and that's why we go out to seek opportunities for federal funding. One thing that's different, roadways and transit get what's called federal formula funding. So there's a certain amount of money distributed every year to those modes. Rail does not get that. All of the federal money that we get from for rail is all competitive grants. So you have to, go in and you basically have to apply and you have to compete against other states and other, entities to get that money. So, one thing I would say that's an obstacle that could be solved is if we, at the federal level could get some formula funding for rail. It would be a fantastic thing and help to move things forward. Let's see, moving on through the questions. Let's see. That's more of a
We've had a couple
comment.
about electrification that came up as
Oh,
well,
yeah,
kind of
sure. Go
grouping
ahead.
them together.
Go ahead, Taylor. Did you want to,
Oh,
or did
I
you want
was
me to
helping you, but happy
try
to
to
take it if
summarize?
you would like.
Yeah, no, I can. Yeah, so electrification comes up regularly. It definitely is something that, I mean, if you travel north on the Northeast corridor, you notice when you switch over to electric, a lot less emissions. It also allows for for faster operation. Um, Electrification, some of the areas south of DC, I think may have been electrified at one point, but really at this point, the infrastructure is pretty cost prohibitive to try to get into doing electrification, at least for longer periods of time or longer distances. And I think we're getting to a point where there's also other technologies emerging that may sort of make more sense than going full electrification route. Um, One of the things that, like, for example, Amtrak's next engines will be dual power, so dual mode. So once you get to DC, there won't be that stop and that 20-minute layover while they switched engines from electric to diesel. The engine will just be able to switch right from electric to diesel operation as it moves south. Which I know is not necessarily what folks who want the electrification are looking for, but it will certainly improve the service there. But I think we're going to see technologies. There's battery technologies that may make more sense rather than the installation of all of the gantries, that need to be put up and all that electrical infrastructure that would need to be put up to do the full electrification. So that's a developing thing. It's certainly something that, we're always keeping our eye on, but not sort of on the horizon, I would say, for, south of Washington, D.C. at the moment.
Yeah. And I would say that's one of the technologies in that kind of new section that we put in there, trying to go above and beyond the FRA outline to say, all right, what are the new technologies that we see coming online in the next 5, 10, 20 years? And how, does that change the calculus of how we move forward? So we're excited to look at some different stuff in that section as well.
Yeah, no, good point, Taylor. Thanks for that. Let's see, can you provide some insight into rail plans for Southside Virginia, an Amtrak stop in downtown Suffolk for Western Tidewater? And then, so yes, this is speaking to sort of rail in the southern part of the state. Yeah, it's, we're just now getting to the point where we're really starting to look at, east-west service, and where that's kind of gelling is, from Hampton Roads to Richmond to Charlottesville and across, rather than the southern part of the state. And that matches up with our corridor ID project. So corridor identification and development is a program that FRA started with IIJA, the last round of funding. And we have two corridors, the Commonwealth Corridor, which is our east-west corridor, and DC to Bristol. And looking at kind of, extending from Bristol to, or from Christiansburg to Bristol, and then making that connection between Doswell and Charlottesville. But I think, after looking at those connections, it might be possible to look some further south in the state. I think right now, the focus is just more on we've got these population centers and people that need to move from east to west, for example, and then, down the western part of the state. But it's certainly, as we look out to the far future, something that we can take into consideration and look at is, that east-west, in more of the southern portion of the state, because I recognize there isn't east-west service really anywhere in the state right now. So that's a good question and a good point.
I'll jump ahead a little bit and
Yeah, go
let you
ahead.
look at some questions, but yeah, that east-west or connection, there are several questions later on that, asked about the question we asked about where do you want to go? And we did not have that as a slide here because we're actually still kind of tabulating that and getting that all straight in GIS. It's a little bit of a complex thing to map in terms of, a lot of people gave us specific, routes that they were interested in here to here. And a lot of people gave us, some very detailed answers with, mentioning multiple cities and locations. So we're trying to map all that to the best we can. But I will say that as Ian said, we're going to have a whole report that kind of comes out with the survey results. And so we will have the larger, results of that question of like, what new service or enhanced service would you like? But I can say that by far the number one requested route was the Richmond to Charlottesville route. Was kind of the number one thing that we heard repeatedly, either that as a specific short, segment or as the longer kind of Commonwealth corridor that we're studying through Corridor ID. But we will have that longer map report as well as a couple maps, I think, showing the results of that question soon.
Thanks, Taylor. Yeah, that's good information. Let's see. Amtrak's Carolinian has stopped in Fredericksburg for many years. Recently, the southbound train stopped serving Fredericksburg while the northbound train continues to stop in Fredericksburg. Why is Amtrak doing a one-way service on this train regarding the Fredericksburg stop? Yeah, I'm not sure. That definitely is an Amtrak question, because that's one of the long distance routes. And so yeah, no, we certainly we can try to check with Amtrak and see if there's an answer to that, but that's certainly an Amtrak question. What steps is DRPT taking to continue prioritizing passenger rail over freight traffic once the transforming rail and Virginia projects are complete? Well, I guess at first I'd say we don't really want to prioritize necessarily passenger over freight. I think they're both important, and so we want to try to develop both of them, concurrently. But the transforming rail is it's got a couple of different parts. Some of it's funded, some of it's not funded, and really there's a lot of work to be done still in transforming rail before you would complete all of those projects and find the funding for the things that aren't funded. So I think we have a lot to do with transforming rail before we kind of move beyond that, I guess is what I would say with that question. Charlottesville passenger line to Richmond. Okay, no, good comment about Charlottesville there. Yep, a couple
This is
of
where we got
those.
into the response section, where people were putting their responses to Ian's questions into the chat.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of muddied it a little bit.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
I am seeing
yeah, go ahead, Ian.
one that is a few folks are asking specifically around DRPT and a railway trail project along, I think, the Washington Old Dominion corridor in Northern Virginia. We've had a few questions specifically around that, about a feasibility study. So I figured I would highlight that one because I think we have 5 or 6 questions specifically around that topic.
Okay. And sorry, if you can yeah, now it's searching through them is difficult. If you can maybe
it's at the
read
bottom.
those.
There's some of the most recent ones asked. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. The study conducted to evaluate the feasibility of a rail with trail project along the WOND corridor. I don't know that is a great question and something we certainly can look into. I wasn't aware of that, of a need for that, study at the WOND, and this would be, I guess, a rail along with the existing trail that's there. But yeah, no, this is absolutely something that we can try to find out more information on that and respond back. But there currently isn't a plan by us, to do a study to evaluate that that I'm aware of, I'll say. Let's see, are there any other any others that are kind of multiples that
There were a few questions specifically around the way in which DRPT continues or maybe plans to continue interacting and coordinating with other states. I know that you talked a little bit about, I think there's one specifically around that, but I think there's been some general questions about, and probably that has to do with Amtrak and those types of lines, but how DRPT has been and is continuing to coordinate with other states.
Sure. So there's a couple of different organizations that there's the Southeast Rail Commission that meets regularly and is kind of focused on expanding rail in the Southeast. We work regularly with, as I said before, the surrounding states. Certainly, with all of our connections up to the Northeast corridor with DC and all the work going on with the expansion of the Long Bridge, et cetera. We do a lot of coordination with up towards the northern end of the corridor as well. And then again with North Carolina, there's a lot of interest in North Carolina of people being able to, go from Charlotte, Raleigh, and have a fairly fast trip up, through Virginia, through Richmond, and up to the Northeast corridor and connecting to all the service up there. So, that's something that's actively developing. And then, the folks in Hampton Roads, I know they've always asked for, they're always needing, looking for potentially more service to, Richmond and points north, and, actively investigating that too, again, with our corridor ID projects, especially the Commonwealth corridor is one that would potentially add frequencies between, Richmond and Hampton Roads. And so, yeah, actively exploring that. I see one here. Is there any chance that we will get a full east-west rail corridor? And that again, goes back to that Commonwealth corridor. And just to let folks know, our state rail plan should be wrapping up towards the end of this year, but our corridor ID projects will be, if schedules stick, we'll be moving into the corridor ID service development plans for both the Commonwealth corridor and DC to Bristol in the late part of this year, early part of next year. And so, that'll be another round of public involvement in looking specifically at those corridors and looking at that east-west service that would go, from Hampton Roads through Richmond, Charlottesville, and then on west, and then extending, the extension to Bristol. So, keep your eyes open for an opportunity to start, participating in those efforts as well. So really, the corridor ID program is part of what we're focusing on for those, what comes after transforming rail, what comes after sort of what we have programmed and planned so far. And that will help to kind of drive that. Let's see, are there any plans to expand the silver or orange lines? I'm not sure. That's a great question. And obviously related. There may be some folks on the transit side that would be able to answer that question. And certainly WMATA could potentially answer that. But yep, I do not know for sure on that.
We did get a question about an inland port in Southwest Virginia. And if we're, aware of that, and we definitely are, that is a project that VDP is really taking the lead on, as designated by the General Assembly. And so they've been working on that study and we've been involved with it. And I think, there will be more to come from that in the future. But we are not the lead on that project, but it is a very exciting possibility.
Thanks, Taylor. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, and I see several more questions or comments about more service to the southwestern part of the state. And again, that corridor ID program in our corridors is something that are definitely going to look at that and continue to try to bolster that. Let's see. New railroads. Okay, yep. Now I'm trying to sort out the questions to Ian's or the answers to Ian's questions. Let's see. Oh yeah, another question about Tennessee. Is Tennessee doing anything to bring rail service to Bristol? I know they're focused, they are looking internally in Tennessee at, potential rail connections. I think which is understandable. I think they're probably kind of leaving it up to us to to get rail service, down to Bristol. And so, it really is a Virginia-led effort. But again, starting DC to Bristol would be early next year. We would be getting into that, potentially into that service development plan phase for the extending service from Christiansburg. And that should work out well. We have that, 2027 date for service to Christiansburg. So by the time that we're really starting to, in earnest work on the service development plan for the extension to Bristol, we should have service starting up to the Christiansburg. So that should work out well.
Mm-hmm. And, similar to what you said about the Virginia Breeze, new Tidewater current service kind of being an early indicator to provide data, on how big the demand is for those east-west movements. The success of the Christiansburg service once it's open would, only increase the pressure to show that, when you build it, people come for rail. So that's kind of, one of the things that could really support advancing that project, and give a little more heft to it, especially in federal grant applications and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Randy and Taylor, I know you'd mentioned earlier, there's a question specifically around technologies for drilling underpasses that could simplify the process of getting across tracks. So maybe that's not one that you all had come across yet, but just thought that was interesting in the context of Taylor kind of identifying new types of rail technology as something you all want to highlight within the plan. So,
no, that's a good observation, Ian. And yeah, it's always interesting. There are some kind of unique technologies out there for doing things like that. It's always working above or underneath an active rail line, though it gets a little tricky. And some of those technologies are acceptable, I'll say, to some railroads, and some have an issue with some of those. So I think it would kind of be on a case by case basis as to whether that would make sense to use. But certainly, that's something that like our partner agency, VPRA, who is really more involved in the final design and construction side of projects, that's certainly a strategy or technology that, could be recommended, something that they could look at if the situation were appropriate for using something like that.
Kind of on that technology, where our research has kind of, gone so far is there's a lot of crossing monitoring technology and companies that are sort of entering the space now. So we're looking at that as part of the rail plan, and even considering looking into some pilots of, some of those technologies that help with the routing, so drivers, can avoid as many crossings when they're blocked and those sorts of things, and, improve safety in other ways around crossings. So, and those are, typically not ground disturbing. So they're a little easier to get going, more quickly and sort of test out and see the results. So that's going to be a big focus of what we're looking for, particularly since our new administration is very focused on safety and what we can do throughout the state for safety.
Mm. Yeah, great points, Taylor. One that's related, I guess, to Ian, this is maybe more in your ballpark, but someone asking about it'd be interesting to see the demographics of the people who responded to the survey. And I don't know. I know we collected some information. I don't know if that'll be available in that report, and to what
Yeah.
detail.
Yeah, I need to make sure I have it, but I think we took like age, household income, and area of the state, so general demographic questions. So yeah, that will all the demographic details collected within the survey will be a part of the report. Yeah.
Okay. No, great. Let's see. I see one here about DRPT and VPRA would benefit by connecting with the Virginia APA, American Planning, Virginia chapter of the American Planning Association, SAP. Yes, yeah, I will be at the VAPA conference, and I will be. Yeah, we actually we submitted a couple of proposals for sessions on rail, and it sounds like this year may not be a rail year because we didn't get our sessions accepted, but we both on the transit and the rail side, a lot of us are planners, and we regularly engage with and work with VAPA. So, but that's a good suggestion. Definitely wanna coordinate with the other planners in the state. Let's see. Trying to find a few more here to answer in the last few minutes. I don't know, Taylor, are there any others that are jumping out at you as far as?
I was still muted.
Oh, sorry.
There is a question about with the new Christiansburg service, the possibility to work with Virginia Tech for increasing trains for game days and other big events. We're very focused on getting the train there in the first place. But I know that North Carolina actually has had a lot of success with doing sort of additional trains for large events that they've held. And they're kind of a nationwide leader in sort of taking advantage of those big opportunities to get more people to a place, with less cars. So they're definitely a model that we could consider with that. But for now, we're focused on the first step and then moving on from there.
Yep. No, good response. Yeah, I see one here that it's a good one to kind of bring up. It says, won't adding more stops to existing service make rail travel times less competitive with car travel times? And that certainly can be the case. But there are ways around that. I think, as you add more stops to a line, you can start thinking of different levels of service. There might be certain trains that would stop at just certain stations. And so you can have, or you can have local trains, local service essentially, and then like an express. So there's different ways that you can handle that. But yes, in general, if you add more stops, it is going to potentially impact the travel time. So that's also part of the reason why our corridor ID service development plans, you do want to look at a corridor level service and figure out what makes the most sense as far as where what station locations make the most sense, what type of service makes the most sense. Because you definitely don't want to create a disincentive for people to ride the train if, then their train trip that used to be between point A and point B now has all these different points in between, and that's slowing down service. So yeah, a very good point and a very good question. But yeah, it really is, it comes down to looking at different types of service and what makes the most sense. Yeah.
Well, I know we're
Yeah.
almost at time, and I just wanted to, there's one question that I wanted to answer, which was, will this be posted anywhere. And I know that we're recording this meeting, and DRPT will, I think, put it up on their YouTube channel or some other video format. It will be available for you all to rewatch. And I know that some folks had emailed that weren't able to make it tonight. But also for those that had asked questions that weren't answered, we have all of them. And the purpose of this meeting was to collect questions and comments. And so we're really appreciative of that. I guess I can kick it back over to the DRPT team to kind of wrap up as we approach 8 o'clock. But from my side, gratitude to you all for participating and hanging out with us on this Monday evening, and sort of taking a look under the hood about what this rail plan is about, and reflecting on some of the engagement we've done so far. We're really excited to be a part of this planning group, and thank you all again.
Yeah. No, thank you, Ian. Yeah, and yeah, I guess we will close the meeting here, but also reminding everybody, there is that email there on the screen. If you have, additional follow-up questions, or, your question, you're still looking for an answer to the question that you submitted in the chat, feel free to go ahead and submit those via that drptpr@drpt.virginia.gov email. There's also that QR code there that will get you to our general sign up link, so that you can, you'll get regular updates on, not just the state rail plan, but all things, rail and transit that are happening at DRPT, press releases, things like that. So, please do that. And obviously, if you want to follow us on any of the social media platforms, we are on all those platforms as well. So please do. And yeah, really appreciate the time. As Ian said, it's great that you would this many people would come out on a Monday evening to learn more about a rail plan. That's gives us a good feeling, and hopefully we're moving in the right direction. And with the next public meeting, we'll have more information for you and more opportunities to participate. And I see Maria's turned on her camera. Do you want to say anything, Maria, on the way out here?
You said it all, Randy. I just wanted to let folks know I've been sitting here listening through it all, and appreciate everyone's comments and questions. I love seeing, I think we had more Q&A than we had participants, by maybe twice as many. So this was a deeply engaged group. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Randy and team.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.